Hello and welcome again, my gentle and of course very modern apes, and welcome to another episode of the Library of Error, where we are continuing our excursion and exploration through why human evolution is false. The scientific case for independent origins. Has ape-to-man evolution been overturned? By the illustrious YouTuber Standing for Truth, or as we call him around here, Monkey for Banana. Now, it will come as no surprise that the next chapter, which I kind of teased last time we were here, which is just called Appendix 3, Refuting Dating Methods, Will Millions of Years Rescue Human Evolution? By Standing for Truth. I kind of gave you a hint last time that this is a pretty rough one. It's not particularly good, but neither have any of the other chapters really been. This one is just particularly stark because it, of course, violates laws of physics. What else is new? Now, it says that it's written here by Standing for Truth. I feel like I remember when this document, for those of you who may not remember, some of these individuals, the two authors of this book, Standing for Truth, who of course gets first billing, and then Raw Matthew, who appears in, he's credited with some chapters and appendices in this book. They were circulating around this document like a year or two ago that was it's just this book, right? It's just this book in like PDF form. It was bad then. Very little has changed. I would love to see how it's evolved, if you will, over time. But this section was written by Raw Matt back then, if memory serves, but Standing appears to be taking credit for it here. I wouldn't do that if I were him. It's egregious, as I mentioned previously. But let's go ahead and dive in, because we have this section, and then we have Cladistics by Raw Matt, which is, wow, it's something else. I really don't want to give too many spoilers for that, and we will also cover the closing at that juncture. But right now, we're just going to go ahead and do Refuting Dating Methods, Will Millions of Years Rescue Human Evolution? By Standing for Truth. Now, he begins by saying, of course, can billions of years salvage the human evolution narrative? Typically, when a proponent of evolution is confronted by the empirical evidence, they will resort to their deep time rescue device. They believe that if they have all the time in the world, their ape-like ancestor can advance into a human. This assumes that time is the hero of the plot of human evolution, when in fact, it is the antagonist of the plot for evolutionary philosophy. You know, again, I've said this before, but I like this idea that these guys seem to think that there's like a shadowy cabal of scientists like hanging out in some nefarious Gothic castle at the edge of a cliffside around this very long table, all wearing our dark robes and of course our Darwin pendants, and like we sit around and nefariously plot to overthrow young Earth creationism. That would be punching down, by the way. No one, I've said this many times before here on this channel, and indeed in these episodes, but like no one actually cares about young Earth creationism outside those of us who dunk on it for a hobby. I'm back in academia right now, pursuing my PhD, and all of my colleagues and indeed my superiors are incredibly tickled that I do this on the side. So they still exist, they say, which, again, it never stops being hysterical. That my professors for my master's program said the same thing, so it's a little deja vu going on here. But can we talk about this for just a second? Because this doesn't seem to appreciate like the chain of events, historically speaking. Ancient time, deep time, came far before evolutionary theory did. Like, this was a Lyell thing. Darwin took principles of geology with him on the Beagle when he was voyaging around the world. So evolution doesn't rely on deep time. It's not a rescuing device. Deep time was something that was understood to be just a fact about the world around us when evolution was discovered, when the principles and the mechanisms of it were described by Darwin. So For it to be a rescuing device, it kind of has to be ad hoc. This wasn't ad hoc, but I can understand why they would think that that's how science worked, because that's how young Earth creationists operate. That's how they perform their, it's how they do performative science, if you will. Imagine, the best way that I like to put it is that, I've said this, in my larger videos before, but the creation science accommodates, right? Evolutionary theory and conventional science, these predict. So let's continue. This is because the type of change essential to take an ape-like creature into a human is non-existent. That doesn't really follow, right? What the idea that would follow here is that you need deep time to get the amount of change, right, that we see for this 7 million odd year ascension from, or the common ancestry between humans and chimps to humans and chimps, respectively, in the modern age. But this just goes, we need deep time for a rescuing device because there is no change. And that's a weird way of putting things, because I know for a fact the authors of this book accept incredible amounts of change, because they accept this idea of created kinds, God creating these kinds of animals, these progenitor archetypic species that then hyper-evolve into their extant forms after Noah's Ark. I feel like I'm like talking fantasy lore here. Ooh, maybe it is. Mutations. Okay, the changes we see in the genomes of biological organisms is opposite to the types of changes fish to fisherman evolution would need. Again, it seems like I'm having trouble reading this. It's just composed that poorly. Let me repeat that sentence for you. This is because the type of change essential to take an ape-like creature into a human is non-existent. The changes we see in the genomes of biological organisms is opposite to the types of changes fish to fisherman evolution would need. A better way of putting that would, of course, be the changes we see in the genomes of biological organisms are opposite or contradictory to the types of changes fish to fisherman evolution would need. That's a very awkward way of putting a sentence. Mutations are the destroyer of functional genetic information. That's just wrong. Evolutionary biologists assert that mutations can bring out the true novelty necessary to take a pre-human into a human. All changes observed in the genome are either degrading to the function of the organism, functionally compromising, or general adaptation. So, general adaptation, how is that mutually exclusive to evolution or beneficial mutations? None of this tracks. But we've done this whole mutation thing to death. See some of the previous episodes if you want to see how adept Ramat and Standing for Truth are at just butchering any understanding or anything conceptually related to mutations and any kind of natural selection. It's a bad deal. But we want to get to the radiometric data. And I've done that to death already. Biological organisms appear to have the ability to adapt to their environments based on pre-existing algorithms pre-programmed into the genome. You can just say things according to these guys, right? You can really just make shit up. The moon appears to be made of cheese. Rooted in what exactly? Again, these guys love to throw words like empirical around, and then they just bring nothing to the table. This is all evidence of forward thinking and design. You have to have a criteria for a designer in order to admit it as a design support, right? If you don't outline the criteria for something, then you don't know whether new data can fit into that category or not. So you can't say that it's clearly evidence of design if you don't know how to define design. Oftentimes, the beneficial mutations that evolutionary biologists point to as types of mutations that add new novel information to the genome turn out to be epigenetic adaptation. See Appendix 1 for more detail on epigenetics and the overturning of beneficial mutations. If you haven't seen that episode, the Ramat episode, you need to stop everything right now and go check that out. Ramat couldn't define epigenetics in that chapter. He struggled to exhibit any kind of comprehension of even the most basic definitions behind it. It's actually incredible how that chapter is laid out. But again, we've already done it. So even the mutations that result in slight disadvantage to the organism are still reductive. Mutations decrease functional genetic information. No, they don't. A huge portion of mutations that occur, beneficial to mutations that occur, I should say, are as simple as duplicating segments of the genome, segments of DNA, right? Experiencing a duplication event, and then point mutations, insertions, deletions, things of that nature on that new section. And that's how we get de novo proteins in, like, the ice fish, for example, which I've yet to see a creationist really tackle. And so, even the most beneficial ones that are truly mutation-related, such as sickle cell anemia, is degenerative. We have observed this in Lenski's bacterial experiment. There have been some adaptations seen. Like, how are these guys differentiating between beneficial mutations and adaptations? Right? Where are we getting our list of definitions here? Because I doubt they could tell you the difference. There have been some adaptations seen. Therefore, there has been an increase in fitness in the narrowest of ways. That's, you're just dragging that out of them. That's just a white knuckle across the floor. Yeah, okay. Maybe there's a little bit of, fitness uptick, but, it's not evolution. How? How then? Evolutionary biologists often misunderstand what the term fitness really means. Oh my god! They defined it! Darwin defined fitness. What do you mean evolutionary biology? That guy Einstein, he really messes up the definitions of relativity. He really misunderstands what it means. Like, standing, raw mat, this is really, really stupid. This is a really, really bad way to try to make your point. That's a killer sentence. The best definition of fitness is total functionality. According to whom? You can't just change definitions. This is why he gets so snippy when you bring up the fact that they just, you can make their genetic entropy work, as I said previously, if you just change the type of fitness that you're using, if you just change the definition of fitness. Therefore, you're not really talking about fitness, and it's not really genetic entropy, is it? I just put nope, raw mat on the side. They also have this quote from Lynn Margulis, who says, although random mutations influenced the course of evolution, their influence was mainly by loss, alteration, and refinement. Kind of like what I just said. Duplication events and altering of these new sections of genome. Never, however, did one mutation make a wing, a fruit, a woody stem, or claw appear. Of course not. That would be asinine. Anybody with a high school understanding of biology knows that. Much of these structures they emerge after precursor mutation, each intermediate step being beneficial in and of itself in its own right. Evolution, for example, is a great iteration of this, right? An eye spot, a light-sensitive patch, is nothing compared to the fully developed eye of a primate or some cephalopods. But that being said, it's hugely beneficial to being blind. So it confers a fitness benefit when in comparison to other completely eye spotless organisms. This is how these things emerge. It's just not that complicated, but evidently that is still too high a bar. So this means that although there may be an adaptive gain observed due to a mutation, the rest of the genome is still degenerating in many other ways. Keep in mind, this chapter is titled Radiometric Dating, and it's like 6 pages long, and we're like 1 page in, and we still haven't gotten to the radiometric dating. Let's see. Lenski's bacteria have adapted in a narrow sense, but they have also shrunk in functional genome size. Genome size has absolutely nothing really to do with the functionality or complexity or really any of those things of an organism, right? There are organisms much simpler than any mammal, any eukaryote, not eukaryote, I guess, any animal, any member of the animal kingdom that have just enormous genomes. They're huge. I think it's ferns that tend to have these huge genomes, but some ferns, I think lungfish also have very large genomes. We'll look it up later once we delve into the source checking. But yeah, it's like, oh, the genome's getting smaller. This is genetic entropy. This is what is being alluded to right here. Okay, then all organisms should have a shrinking genome. That's not what we see. We see duplication events all the time, which of course would be the growth of the genome. They are losing genes short-term for adaptive purposes. Not always. Again, the icefish, that's a de novo protein addition. Okay, the total functionality has reduced. No, it hasn't. Losing functional systems and functional genetic components is not going to result in any real evolutionary advancement. No, that's just, he's just saying words. Yes, it would. But, like, it's hard to take a sentence like that seriously when half the words used in the sentence have been previously misdefined or altered intentionally. Trade-offs happen all the time, but this trade-off is clearly not sustainable. Why not? Why not? Evolution is all about trade-offs. Why all of this in an appendix on dating methods? Oh, man after my own heart. Thank you. Maybe we'll get an answer here. The effects of mutation, genetic mistakes through reduced information. That's just also not what a mutation is. I'm literally teaching this right now in DNA and the protein synthesis section of the biological anthropology course that I teach graduate students. I'm a TA for the lab portion, so I teach it all by myself. It's actually very scary, but very fun. Mutations it's simply a copying error, right? It's an error in the copying of DNA, right? And in this case, DNA. It has nothing to do with functionality. It's just a copying error. Oh boy, all right. And natural selection, okay, genetic mistakes reduce information. Natural selection, fine-tuning process that keeps a species as strong as it can be. Again, that is just not the definition of natural selection. Natural selection doesn't select for strength or smarts or anything like that unless the environment dictates that it confers a fitness benefit. Otherwise, we would be knee-deep in, just yoked animals. Just everyone would be jacked or have these huge brains. It's all about your reproductive benefit, right? It's conferring reproductive success, differential reproductive success. So if being slower, for whatever reason, would give one paramecium the ability to reproduce better than another paramecium, that would be selected for. That's just a hypothetical, of course, but is slower better? In this case, yes. So it's context specific. That's something these guys never get. I know for a fact that Standing has had this explained to him numerous times, but he cannot wrap his brain around it, or he just doesn't want to. Either way, if you can't get the basic definitions right, it's really funny to be coming out parading texts like this, like you're overturning the paradigm. It's just, it's kind of funny, I guess. It's enjoyable to kind of watch him fumble around, but kind of like in a sad way, like in a way that you look at like a monkey try to open a cage. You're kind of like, oh, look, he's so clever. He thinks he's so clever, but he's never going to get it. He doesn't have the ability. Okay. More time means more degeneration. You would have to show support for your genetic entropy in order to support that idea, that statement there, that degeneration is the natural termination point for all organisms, which you haven't done, unless you change the definition of fitness, which means it's not genetic entropy. Okay. Once again, time is not the hero of the plot for those that want to believe so badly in germs to geniuses evolution. I do love all the little, I don't know which one, the blank to blank, fish to fisherman, germs to geniuses, molecules to man. I think those are funny, clever. The evolutionary story can have a trillion years, and it still would not result in the type of evolution taught in textbooks. That's just wrong. This has been shown to be incorrect both in direct observation, direct experimentation, and both in small-scale organisms like mice and bacteria, but also in simulations, which are frequently used to make points in like physics and higher upper-level math studies, ologies. All right. Now that we've properly understood that adding time to the evolutionary story will not save it from the empirical facts, we can properly address why the dating methods employed by the scientists of the evolutionary paradigm are fatally flawed. You just say scientists, right? Like, that's how flat earthers talk. The globe earth paradigm. For starters, every single dating method, including the Isochron method, relies on numerous unprovable and unknowable assumptions. So this is really funny, because when I first got this book, I know for a fact, based off of conversations with Standing for Truth, the putative author of this text, that this guy didn't know what isochron dating was, which leads me to completely speculate here that he was writing this text, realized that isochron dating might become problematic down the line, and so he just slapped it in there with other radiometric dating methods. Radiometric dating methods don't work, including isochron. But he couldn't tell you what isochron is. And I know he proceeds to not tell us what isochron is because there is no talk of how isochron works, right? So isochron dating is a type of radiometric dating, but it makes no assumptions about the ratio of parent to daughter material. And it does this in a very specific way that hopefully I'll have a chance to show you later. All right, then he shows a picture of radiometric dating. Are there any assumptions? By Vernon Cupps, PhD, nuclear physics. And then right below it says Acts and Facts, December 2014, page 11 through 12. Acts and Facts is I think it's CMI, so Creation Ministries International's website. So they're citing a creationist for this, which is funny. Of the 8 assumptions, none can be considered to rigorously hold in all situations. Therefore, dating by this method is at best a hypothesis concerning the age of any rock, sweet, or mineral. It is certainly not a scientific fact. Okay, so what are the 8 assumptions, you might be wondering? He doesn't list them. We don't get the 8 assumptions, and I honestly don't think highly enough of Vernon Cupps, given he's a nuclear physicist and not a geologist, that we're going to be tracking this guy down. Maybe we will. I don't know. I admit it's less because of the nuclear physicist thing. The nuclear physicists are actually, at least an understanding of nuclear physics is incredibly vital to understanding radiometric decay, right? But radiometric dating, the process of radiometric dating, is more the convergence of geology with nuclear physics. Okay, what are some of these assumptions? We're not going to go through all 8, like I said. These dating methods assume the initial conditions of the rock. They assume that the rate has always been the same and has never accelerated in the past. Essentially, this means they make assumptions based off of the constancy of rate. They also assume a closed system, and they have an assumed history. Now, it's kind of funny because we've got like four examples there, four of the 8 assumptions, half of the 8 assumptions. We don't go through any of the others. But whatever, if you wanted to know, I guess you just never will, or you will if we look up Vernon Cupps in a second. Paleoanthropologists will often cite isochron dating as a type of dating method that is mostly free from assumptions. They believe this method is near perfect. This method analyzes multiple samples from the same rock unit. The method behind this method is employed to eliminate possible contamination. Sadly, for deep time evolution, scientists from the RATE team have uncovered conflicting dates for even this admired technique. Okay, so a couple of things here. One, and I'm just going to knock this one out right off the bat, he doesn't proceed to talk about isochron at all. In fact, I underlined including isochron and then put the little arrow up to the little table here because none of these have anything to do with isochron. So he's basically, I kid you not, he's just lumping in isochron and like hoping that no one will notice. That's kind of lying, right? Like but then again, this nice little like Wikipedia grab again doesn't actually define isochron dating and what makes it unique, which is that it doesn't assume parent to daughter ratios at formation, right? That's just not mentioned, and that's because one of the assumptions that they list is they assume initial conditions of rock, except isochron doesn't do that. They assume that the rate has always been the same and has never accelerated in the past. That's assumption number 2. So assumption number 1, bypassed by isochron, and also we see rocks forming today, folks, right? We see igneous rocks forming all the time, and we can look at these rocks and we can examine their parent-to-daughter ratios, and that's kind of how we know that they always start all parent, no daughter, right? There is one exception to this, and that's when rock mixes within magma chambers very close to the mouth of the volcano. But those also have diagnostic signs. So assumption number 1, plink, it's not going to be helpful to bring up if you're a young Earth creationist. It's bypassed by isochron, and it's also just never been observed. Like what they're talking about has never been observed, where it's non-all parent at conception of the rock. So assumption number 2, they assume that the rate has always been the same and has never accelerated in the past. It's really funny because this book was written before I really started pumping up the heat problem, right? For those of you who might not know, the heat problem is this massive issue for young Earth creationism. So much so that Answers in Genesis, Creation Ministries International, and Institute for Creation Research, respectively, have articles on how there is a heat problem that they're currently trying to solve. This heat problem comes about because they are trying to explain why rocks date so old. Right? The only way that they can get these rocks to date old, other than just saying, well, God made the Earth to look old, which very few of them will dare to do, is to go the other route, the more creative route, and say, well, rocks haven't always been experiencing radioactive decay at the same rate. It was accelerated during the year of Noah's flood. The problem with this, of course, is that when you cram 4.5 to 4.8 billion years of heat, because decay releases heat, into a single half year or year, that's a lot of heat. In fact, depending on the model, you're either, if we're doing CPT or the one that AIG, ICR, these guys tend to push, the catastrophic plate tectonics model, we're talking about like enough heat to vaporize the granitic crust of the Earth a few times over. And if you do hydroplate, which is Walt Brown's fun idea and purported by Standing many times, then that's like 5,000 trillion 1 megaton H-bombs, right? 5,000 trillion. It's a little hot, right? You're just plasmifying the planet. So it's not going to work. So accelerating we know that you can't accelerate the nuclear decay. All right, plink, you can't do it. They will appeal to things like the piezoelectric effect, which, again, it has diagnostic characteristics. They want the piezoelectric effect to have impacted every single rock on Earth in order to accelerate nuclear decay. Or they want to utilize Z-pinch, which is another kind of more nuclear physics-y thing. Problem with Z-pinch is that Z-pinch will only work if you amp the heat up, so you basically create a heat problem that's multiple times the heat problem you had in order to accelerate the nuclear decay. Like, you're actually making it even worse than what I just said under hydroplate and CPT. And the piezoelectric effect, again, diagnostic characteristics, only been done in a lab. It's hypothesized to be present around during earthquakes, when you get like quartz stressing. But the piezoelectric effect, if memory serves, and I'll double check this in a second, also requires really hot conditions, right? The piezoelectric effect, in order to generate these heavy elements that they need, you're going to be putting like basically belly of a star conditions onto the Earth. So everything they need to accelerate the nuclear decay, just to start accelerating it, is going to create massive amounts of heat. So you can't accelerate it, not unless you've got a cooling mechanism, which they don't, right? I've heard everything from Standing. Hypercanes covering every square inch of the Earth. It gets rid of less than 0.2% of the heat, right? The heat sinking into the mantle, that breaks the law of thermodynamics, boys. If for the heat to actually transfer into the mantle needs to be cooler than the crust of the Earth, which means that the surface of the Earth is in the process of being vaporized, right? None of these things are going to work. They've thrown everything at the wall, and that's why the YouTube creationists, the ones like who've authored this book, are no closer than the professionals. Surprise, shock, I know. The amateurs couldn't do what the people who went to school for like a decade couldn't do. So, I know, shocking. And then they also say in the earlier part of that the rate has always been the same. Yes, we do assume that the rate has always been the same. That's because it's like a law in physics. It's called the law of radioactive decay for a reason. The law of radioactive decay, it's how we know these constants. So not only have we never observed it being violated ever, even though it would be of incredible benefit to the entire energy industry all across the world if we could find some way to accelerate nuclear decay, to change the rate. We've never been able to do it. It's static, right? These rates are well known. It's a law in physics. Unless you wanted to violate like other laws, right? Like the law of conservation of energy, like you're not going to be able to do that, right? It's just not, there are laws for a reason. They're mathematics. So, okay. There's also, they also assume a closed system, and they have an assumed history. No. History is gleaned based off of chemical and geologic properties of these rocks, right? That's how we know if there's been things like contamination or a thermally tumultuous place of origin, right? Like Fenton Hills. We don't assume a closed system. A closed system is a conclusion that can be reached based off of investigation of where the rock was found in situ, right? So, Planck, that's the fourth. Paleoanthropologists will also cite isochron dating. We already went over this, where he just doesn't know what isochron dating is. He talks very briefly about the method, but doesn't seem to click for him that isochron dating, again, it has very few assumptions with it. In fact, really no radiometric dating method is problematic for these assumptions. They're all justified, if you will, by laws of physics. Imagine that, justifying something by law of physics. Or a myriad of other different diagnostic characteristics for examining whether or not a sample could be contaminated, or observation, right? It's, wow, it turns out there's science behind this. That's really crazy. So, if you were, for instance, going to try to invalidate radiometric dating, this section does not do that, right? It bunks up how radiometric dating works in a sense, because it's applying assumptions that are not actually applicable, right? So you're going to have to come up with some more assumptions or something. I don't know really what you really can do to invalidate radiometric dating, considering the entire oil and gas industry relies on its continued ubiquitous success. That's what Bayesian modeling is. And I've actually never heard them really address that either, other than saying, well, I know an oil driller and he doesn't use radiometric dating. He just goes out there and drills the oil. Yes, because they hire a geologist first to come out and model the basin and decide where the drillers will drill. So, the RATE team. Oh, I love the RATE team. The RATE, Radioisotopes in the Age of the Earth team, consisted of seven PhDs who set out to investigate the age of the Earth. The research project lasted many years and resulted in some remarkable discoveries. The RATE scientists took rock samples from the same rock layers and subjected them to dating methods all at once. What did they find? They uncovered different results for the different dating methods. They even include isochron dating. Except, no, they don't. At least not in the chart that you're showing here. Right? Here are methods used. Potassium argon, potassium argon, potassium argon, potassium argon, helium, potassium argon, potassium argon, potassium argon, potassium argon. None of those are isochron. It baffles me. Like, it's as simple as just reading the column. It's just not, it's not too taxing. And yet, we just throw in and click. You see what I mean? This just screams of plunking in isochron dating wherever you bring up radiometric dating, because he's like, shit, what do I do? I don't have anything to say about isochron dating. Okay, this means there are windows for error in every single dating method, again, including isochron. This is where we get to major problems and the biggest assumptions associated with these dating methods. The RATE team concluded, based on their findings, radioisotopic decay rates must have been faster in the past. This means that the constancy of rate assumption made by those who hold to uniformitarianism is wrong. If the RATE team is correct, and the radioisotope clocks were indeed faster in the past, and the decay rates were not always constant, then none of these dating methods can be trusted. One thing that is interesting to note is that we do get similar relative ages of rocks, meaning down at the bottom of the geologic column we get older ages than the rocks at the top. This is exactly what we would expect based on the global flood model of NOAA. Rocks laid down early in the flood should give older ages than the rocks at the top, which would be from the end of the flood. The dates derived from dating methods are clearly relative and not absolute. We know heat and pressure can speed up decay rates, and since the Genesis flood would have created a substantial amount of heat and would have wreaked incredible havoc within the rocks themselves, this would have been able to accelerate radioactive decay immensely. Therefore, dates could come back as millions of years, and yet only be thousands of years old. I hope what we've said to preface this just lights that giant hunk of nonsense up like Rudolph's nose. That's crazy, but we are going to get into this a little bit more because I really want to talk about the RATE project. Okay, so now that we are appropriately in mini mode, let's talk a little bit about the RATE team. So the RATE group was a group of, as mentioned in the text was a group of young Earth creationist PhDs who were effectively trying to show that the Earth isn't as old as it may look. This was kind of their unspoken goal. Now, the RAID group has been discontinued since 2005, and in a book on their findings, the group of YEC scientists, they basically had to just, this is a quote, admit that a young Earth position cannot be reconciled with the scientific data without assuming that exotic solutions will be discovered in the future. No known thermodynamic process could account for the required rate of heat removal, nor is there any known way to protect organisms from radiation damage. In this paper that you have kind of showing on your screen right now, this background one, this I believe is in Science and Education, and it's in 2009, so well after the RAID group disbanded. And I really like it because it includes quotes from the RAID group's work itself. So they say, where did all this heat go? Humphreys, page 69 to 70, proposed water flowing through the cleavage planes of biotite, so water cooling some of the heat, which, as you've seen in other videos, and as Humphreys himself has now admitted, doesn't work. Thermodynamic conversion of energy in an expanding gas. This is very similar to some of the hydroplate arguments. It also doesn't work, something Humphreys has, if memory serves, copped to. And this is the craziest one. Space-time as a deformable surface in a hyperspace as a possible mechanism to account for heat lost in mineral crystals. Humphreys has done a full 180 on this space-time thing. I've included the source to that in one of my community posts because it's very funny. He's basically just like, yeah, that's not really going to work. The author of this paper notes that these explanations range from the ordinary but obviously inadequate, as Humphreys himself again notes, to the realm of pure science fiction in the case of hyperspace, again, as Humphreys knows. Humphreys gave the expansion hypothesis the most attention, probably because it falls between the two extremes. However, this is a quote from Humphreys, however, I would like to emphasize here that all creationist creation or flood models I know of have a serious problem with heat dispersal, and they still do. So the solution I outline here should be useful in any creationist geological model. The solution takes advantage of a little-known but well-established consequence of the expansion of the cosmos. It makes energy disappear. That includes heat energy. A rapid expansion makes heat disappear fast enough to alleviate our problem, perhaps solving it. And the author of the paper goes, while cooling by expansion is normally understood to only apply to gases, Humphreys offered, as far as I can tell, the loss mechanism would apply not only to free particles, but also particles under the influence of electromagnetic forces. This application of expansion to solids is extremely dubious because solids require the close proximity of bonded atoms. Humphreys offered no calculation of the heat required to break the atomic bonds or to release trapped gas molecules such as helium. Instead, he proposed the speculation that the real problem is how to keep a non-radioactive material from getting too cold at the same time. But he affirmed, I am confident that a good explanation exists, whether or not we can find it. Now, this is very, very interesting, in my opinion, because at least the professionals acknowledge that there is a problem, right? This is something that the amateurs wouldn't deign to do. There has been a lot thrown around, as I mentioned, on various proposed solutions to the heat problems. None of them work. Humphreys et al., all these guys still know that there's a heat problem, and as I mentioned in that excerpt kind of at the beginning of my mini-mode section, they've all but just said it's going to be miracles, probably. It's going to have to be miracles. So the pros can recognize this. Now, on the bit in here that discusses the nature of dating methods. So we're going to get to that in just a second. But before we do that, I wanted to touch on something that occurred to me while I was getting all of this set up. I decided to look over the author of the book's YouTube channel just to see if by some chance I had missed some conversation, maybe some new solution to either the heat problem or to this fact of fossil fuel industries, the entire energy industry really of the planet, utilizing radiometric dating in order to find all of these resources, meaning every time you fill up your car, you're validating radiometric dating. And I found two things. I found two videos, which I'm very excited to show you because they are something else. One actually isn't the video itself. It's actually just a comment in the video from another geologist, which is kind of cool. So first up, we have Refuting the Critics, Coal, Oil, and Natural Gas and the Heat Problem. This features the incredible John McKay, who you should all know as the guy who Monkey for Banana frequently has on the channel. My other video, my ARC video, shouldn't have premiered by the time this reaches you, so I'm just going to give a little spoiler for that video. John McKay used to actually run the Creation Science Foundation with Carl Weiland and Ken Ham over in Australia. They split for various reasons. Ken Ham ended up starting Answers in Genesis over here in the United States. And Carl Weiland and John McKay, I don't know how they're doing right now, but certainly at one point they weren't on very good terms. Based on why, I imagine they're probably still not, because John McKay accused then-widowed member of the Creation Science Foundation, Margaret Buchanan, of being a witch and a necrophiliac, which is very, very funny. John McKay, to me, I don't know. You can have your own opinion on him. He seems a bit out there, but you'll kind of see why in a second. And I'm just going to go directly to the clip. But I also want you to appreciate this opener for our pals here. Look at that. He's dancing. The Bitmoji is dancing. I guess that one's raw mad. But I like the idea that they've done like the PS2 Batcave here in order to show themselves being like the League of Creation Justice or something. I don't know. If they're paying for an animator, you'd think you would just pay a little extra and get something better than what is just Bitmojis dancing around. But I digress.
John, just slightly
reversible temperature. Now, the case of the clay that's in the coal, it's about 200 degrees, so I'll be brutally blunt.
What he's talking about right now is finding bits of clay inside coal seams, like intermingled within coal. And it's very interesting what he's about to say, because he just said the phrase, I'm going to be brutally blunt. And he is going to say, the clay's presence there, given the fact that it has not been effectively obliterated, means that the heat did not exist. There is no heat problem. Because they don't find the heat having impacted this clay. I'm going to play it for you, and then we're going to dig into that.
That clay that's in the coal tells us it has never been as hot as all the local flood experts want it to produce this vast amount of heat. It's a catalyzed reaction, and the same is true for the oil and the gas. We have made all three using simple clay experiments with no temperature emissions of any great significance at all.
So, that's what we call circular reasoning, right? We don't see the traces of these enormous amounts of heat that would have occurred if we'd accelerated the nuclear decay. Now, normal folks who follow the scientific method would then say, well, then accelerated nuclear decay probably didn't happen, given nuclear decay and its heat release these are two facets that are related by a law of physics. When decay occurs, heat is released. So if you cram too much decay into a small amount of time, you get too much heat. Since we don't find evidence for that heat, and this would also go for fission tracks, then that accelerated nuclear decay didn't happen. But what McKay just said is that because we don't find traces of that heat in relation to annihilating clay, that there just wasn't a heat problem. The accelerated nuclear decay still happened, but there wasn't a heat problem. That's just asinine. I'm sorry. That's basically saying, I have my hypothesis, there's data that goes against my hypothesis, therefore the data must be wrong. That's what the equivalent here is. That is just inappropriate on every single level. So, that's kind of what we're dealing with as far as where they're at now, given this was premiered 55 minutes ago. We have not graduated past, I hate to say it, but kind of dumbassery here with regard to how we're conducting ourselves with regard to science. Now, the other thing I wanted to show is this. This is the paper that I usually bring up with relation to oil and coal fossil fuel exploration, right? And the title of this paper is called A Novel Geochemical Toolbox for the Petroleum and Mineral Industries. I want you to really appreciate this here. The summary of impact, okay? Innovative geochemical research led by Selby at Durham has permitted savings of up to $70 million in global mineral and petroleum exploration programs, e.g. Andes of South America, I'm an idiot, west of Shetland's oil field. Selby's research has developed a unique geochemical toolbox using rhenium, osmium, platinum, and palladium that constrain more accurate geological models, leading to better reserve predictions. The toolbox provides previously unavailable geological time constraints and a source of identification of resources, including copper, gold, and crude oil, that gives mineral and or petroleum companies an enhanced economic advantage by improving reserve estimates and or reducing exploration budgets and or minimizing the environmental impacts of exploration. So you scroll down to the underpinning research highlights, and we see a rhenium-osmium chronometer as a reliable, precise chronometer for obtaining the depositional age of clastic marine and lacustrine sedimentary rocks, illustrated the utility of rhenium-osmium to define the age of oil generation from a source rock, demonstrated how rhenium, osmium, platinum, and palladium geochemistry can be used to characterize crude oils, discovered the rhenium-osmium isotope system and platinum-palladium systematics can be used to ascertain the timing of oil generation and identify an oil source rock age in sedimentary basins by analysis of oils alone. That sounds like basin modeling. Developed an understanding of the optimal use of molybdenite and other sulfide minerals for precise rhenium-osmium geochronology in ore systems, and developed independently that rhenium decay constant is accurately and precisely determined. Critical knowledge underpinning rhenium-osmium geochronology. This was published in 2016. This is the backbone of the fossil fuel industry, okay? Without radiometric dating, we don't find the fossil fuels. This is actively being used. You know what isn't being used? Flood geology. Because flood geology makes exactly zero predictions, okay? Evolutionary theory and in association here, the age of the Earth using absolute dating techniques like radiometric dating do. Now contrast that, if you will, to this video from several months, nearly a year ago. Debunked. Oil exploration. Educating Gutsick-Gibbon on geology. I like this. Now that we have absolutely demolished Gutsick-Gibbon's genetic-related arguments, like you could at least get the sentence structure right, okay? Ooh, are you single and Christian? She's a makeup artist, everyone. So scroll down, you're seeing a lot of the usual suspects, and we get to Willem Jan Blom. Blom is a geologist, and I want you to appreciate what Blom has effectively commented on this video. I watched this video when it originally came out. It wasn't very good, but Blom's critiques are a lot better because, like I said, Blom is within the field. So Blom says, are petroleum geologists using the age of rocks to find oil? Even though elementary education videos don't mention the use of radiometric dating to find oil and follow the oil-bearing layer through the subsurface to infer other host rocks, remember we just covered host rocks in that previous paper, and other methods to find layers of particular age that contain oil-bearing rudous reefs to use time temperature index, TTI, and many other applications, these methods are actually used by real petroleum geologists. This can be demonstrated by actually reading the publications of petroleum geologists. So I have gathered some quotes that may indicate the direction in which this is going. Maybe Monkey for Banana, George Bond, and Steph Harima can tell which papers they have read which state that dating rocks is not useful at all. Now, Steph Harima, if memory serves, he's like an engineer or something. Let's check. Hold on. Creationist. What do we got? What you got? Steph Harima. I like this, geochristian.com. Salt magmas. Maybe we'll get Harima's credentials. Steph, Harima, there's one mention. Steph, Harima. Maybe if we click it. Oh god, it's in like Dutch or something. It is in Dutch. I think that's Dutch. Bivgel and Wetterschap. Is that like Bible and worship? I feel like that's a cognate. Contact? Surely there's like an about page. Well, I don't think I'm pretty sure that he is an engineer guy, but someone in the comments I'm sure will correct me. Let's appreciate some of the papers, the actual papers that just blatantly show that Monkey for Banana and George Bond and Steph Harima, none of which are geologists, certainly none of which are petroleum geologists, are wrong. From Yoon et al. 2010, the timing of the petroleum emplacement is crucial in understanding petroleum forming processes and predicting new prospecting regions. From Selby and Creaser, 2005, uncertainties regarding the timing of emplacement and the source of major global hydrocarbon, that's oils, accumulation are commonplace exploration questions. Spencer et al. 1999 specifically identified the timing of maturation as the major uncertainty in the risking for hydrocarbon exploration throughout these complex regions. Mark and Parnell and Kelly, Mark et al. 2010, used argon dating of oil generation and migration at complex continental margins. And Bueller, I think actually et al. 1999, says whilst petroleum production focuses on reservoir quality, reservoir volumes, and methods for estimating and improving petroleum recovery, the focus of the exploration geologists is on understanding petroleum generation, migration, and accumulation in basins. One of the primary aims of modern basin modeling is to establish the time of petroleum formation and migration within basins. From Wong et al. 2002, the aim of the present study was to get a reliable geologic age for the hitherto poorly dated volcanic rocks. However, the primary aim and first application of this study was the establishment of the stratigraphic column for the volcanic successions of the SB in order to meet the urgent need of petroleum exploration in the area. The next one is from Zwingman et al. In 1998. Fluid flows in sedimentary basins are often considered to be responsible for economically important features like the migration of groundwaters, concentration of hydrocarbons and gases, and the formation of ore deposits. And then it discusses how different kinds of ages can provide substantial information for modeling studies designated to predict reservoir qualities of porous sedimentary rocks. There just isn't any getting around this, okay? If the literature base is publishing methods, and then the oil industry, the fossil fuel industry is using those methods, and those methods include radiometric dating, you are screwed with regard to getting rid of radiometric dating. And that's why having, Yahoo's like LPP come on and say his cousin's buddy's friend was like an oil driller, like I said previously, that's nothing. It doesn't do anything. Anecdotes aren't used typically in the hard sciences for a reason. I also just like dunking on LPP because I think he's kind of a ding-dong. And this was nice from Glenn Morton. Glenn Morton is, he does a lot of geology stuff over on Peaceful Science, and this is a quote taken from him. He says, Peaceful Science being Joshua Swamidass, Christian theistic evolutionist guy. We've had him here on the channel before. This is a quote from over on Peaceful Science. I took a poll of my ICR, or Institute for Creation Research, graduate friends who have worked in the oil industry. I asked them one question. From your oil industry experience, did any fact that you were taught at ICR which challenged current geological thinking turn out to be, in the long run, true? It's a very simple question. One man, Steve Robertson, who worked for Shell, grew real silent on the phone, sighed, and softly said, no. A very close friend that I had hired at Arco, after hearing the question, exclaimed, wait a minute, there has to be one, but he could not name one. I could not name one. No one else could either. One man I could not reach to ask that question had a crisis of faith about 2 years ago after coming into the oil industry. I do not know what his spiritual state is now, but he was in bad shape the last time I talked to him. And George Bond just absolutely tantrums in the comments here. saying it doesn't relate to finding, rocks in oil. And Blom is just like, did you not read what I just posted? Blom is just absolutely laying George out here. And eventually, after comment after comment after comment after comment, George just fades into that good night and doesn't say anything new. Blom finishes by saying, you think you would say, if you know what I think and what I will say, I don't have to answer you. If you characterize whatever I say as a rescue device, a discussion is impossible. Nice debating trick. If you start to become insulting and denigrating without reason, I don't see why I would provide you with an answer. So please try again and don't come up with entirely new things. I mean, that characterizes pretty much every interaction that I've had with this particular gaggle of young Earth creationists. So what I hope is evident at this point is that young Earth creationists have absolutely no leg to stand on with the heat problem. The professionals, again, admit this, even they don't deign to pretend otherwise. The amateurs, they don't care. They're not in this for like finding out what's true or altering their opinions to make sure they're in line with empirical data. They're not even in it to come up with interesting hypotheses. They're in it they think it's like a sports match. It's like, okay, whatever. I guess I have fun dunking on them. I do enjoy doing that. So that's firstly evident. Secondarily evident is that they have absolutely not a finger in the oil industry or the fossil fuel industry at large. They have no idea how any of this works, and they don't care to. And lastly, they really do need to hire a better animator, I think, personally. Oh, and the rate team, of course, self-admitted that they have a heat problem and don't currently have a solution for it. So with that, we will move on to the next section of this text. So we're actually going to go back really quick and talk about this chart. Because I've got it fresh on my mind. I just covered this chart with Maddie from Science Side Up over on her channel. The reason is because it was reused by the co-author of this text, Ramat, in what can only be called an expert level bungling. He managed to get wrong so many different things, but I'll put the link in the description so you can see what I mean, and we'll briefly talk about this chart, because this is their discordant dates chart. The idea is that we have these known dates of volcanic eruptions, like for instance, one from Vulcan's Throne, Grand Canyon. This actually is a better chart than the one we saw the other day, Sunset Crater, Arizona. And the ages of these are generally within the past 2,000-3,000 years. Most of them are within the past 200 years. And a handful are from, two of them, one of them just called Russian Volcano, which is very professional, are from 24,000 years ago and 10,000 years max ago, respectively. He just put 10,000 years max. I don't know what that means. So they put the known historical age, and then they proceed to have the rock age, an age in quotation marks by radiometric dating, along with the method used. Now remember, Standing or Ramat, whoever wrote this section, insists that Isochron was included. It just isn't. It's not in the column, as I hope you can see, hence why I put my question mark there. In fact, there were only two methods used, potassium argon and helium. I guess that's like a helium and zircons argument. I've covered helium and zircons before, killed that one to death as well. So we'll leave that one at bay just to speak about this table. Because there's an important thing you should note about this table. And that's that they're using potassium argon dating, which isn't the kind of dating method you should be using for rocks this young. Okay, the potassium argon dating method is for significantly older material, something like a couple million years, something along those lines. And even funnier is the abject lack of understanding with regard to the process, which I know comes as a shock, but allow me to explain. Radiometric dating has pretty much it's a very simple process, right? It's looking at the ratio of parent material to daughter material in an igneous rock. This is because when a rock forms, it's all parent material. If you know the rate of nuclear decay of the unstable elements within that rock, the majority of igneous rocks of which have unstable elements, you can examine that ratio with regard to the rate of decay, the known immutable rate of decay, and you can determine when that rock was formed. It's as simple as that. Now, there's a reason why certain dating methods are used for rocks of certain ages, and that's because if you try to radiometrically date something very young with a series, a ratio of elements, like uranium lead or something like that, whose half-life is in the order of billions, it's like trying to weigh a truck on a microgram scale. You're going to get erroneous results because there simply isn't enough daughter material to measure. You can't distinguish it from noise, right? That's why we don't try to date brand new volcanic rock. No geologist does this. Okay, I guess I should say, no geologist who is worth their salt does this. I kid you not, the only geologist going out there and radiometrically dating brand new volcanic rock, like past 500 years, known date, it's young Earth creationists. And I have an inkling it's because they know they're going to get erroneous results. I know that's perhaps a little bit uncharitable of me, but the longer I do this, the more uncharitable I guess I get. So you're not supposed to date that kind of... You will get erroneous results. This is knowable. The interesting thing is, when you date rock of known age that enough has decayed, like Mount Vesuvius, which is a couple thousand years old, we'll talk about the ones greater than 250 in a second, and you use a proper dating method like argon-argon dating, you get pristine results that actually measure down to the calendar year that we know Mount Vesuvius erupted from Roman records. So how come the radiometric dating methods work so well on Mount Vesuvius and not on the ones in here? Well, for the ones less than 250, I already covered it. There's not enough daughter material to distinguish from noise. You can't do it. But what about Russian volcano from 24,000 years ago? Or Vulcan's Throne, Grand Canyon, from 10,000 years max ago? Well, they're using potassium argon, which doesn't work for things that are 24,000 years old or 10,000 years old, respectively. Let me actually pull up exactly for you. KAR dating. Okay, half-life. Let's see. Okay, so 1,300 million years. That's probably not going to be what we want to use for this brand new rock, right? It's just not going to be your best bet. Now, aside from that, I want to point your attention to something that's kind of funny. And that's that up at the top it says known age of these volcanic eruptions. Now, in the case of the 1,000, 2,000 odd years ago, sure, historical record, archaeological record. This is how we knew Mount Vesuvius's age. We just used the proper dating method, not potassium argon for those. But he has here known age from historical or archaeological data. And then he lists a volcano that erupted 24,000 years ago. So these guys think that the Earth is 6,000 years old. So what archaeological data are we getting that's suggesting an eruption of 24,000 years ago? And how are they going to explain that? It's archaeological data, so they can't appeal to like weird accelerated nuclear decay. There's got to be something else going on, right? It's just kind of weird. Okay, so in conclusion, this chart it's hot garbage. And anytime you see a creationist citing discordant dates, and you see that they are citing any kind of volcanic material, basalt, any kind of flood basalt, or really any kind of igneous rock that's erupted within the past 1,000 odd years, your alarm bell should instantly be going off. And you should be thinking, I bet a creationist did this, because no geologist, again, who's competent they actually test this, because they know they're going to get noise. So, with that horse appropriately beaten to death, let's continue reading. Proponents of deep time evolution and believers of uniformitarianism can no longer deny the evidence that has been produced, indicating strongly that all dating method-related assumptions are violated in various circumstances. No. As I iterated earlier, the rate team has concluded that the assumption of the constant decay at today's rates is the most significant assumption that is erroneous. The rate group has discovered numerous lines of evidence in the rocks themselves that accelerated nuclear decay has occurred in the past. Keep in mind our previous gallivanting into the author's YouTube channel, where their well-respected guest asserted that there can't be a heat problem. We don't find evidence for it. Therefore, no heat problem. The heat didn't happen. Okay, again, the circular reasoning is profound here. These lines of observable evidence include radiohalos and fission tracks. I've covered both of those in other videos, whose links I'll put in the description. These are indications of significant damage in the rocks, result of rapid decay. No, they're not. That's literally not how either of those works. Just in the case of fission tracks, too, their annealing temperature isn't super high, so it's going to be another one of those, if accelerated nuclear decay had happened, you would either need to break physics so that it didn't produce heat, e.g. miracle, or B, the heat would have been too intense that it would have destroyed the fission tracks. So there's two options with fission tracks: miracle or no accelerated nuclear decay. I find it always very amusing that they bring the fission tracks up. It's just... These are indications, in addition to radiohalos and fission tracks, helium in rocks has been an incredible confirmation that accelerated nuclear decay has occurred. Dr. Henke has covered this. He's been on the channel several times in depth on his blog, which I'll also include in the description. And that's just because I've also talked about this in other places on this channel. And while I know that you've kind of come to expect that I'm going to beat dead horses with the young earth creationism stuff, I would prefer to give you the most new content as possible. So I'm not going to go through this because it's not particularly new. I've done videos encompassing this kind of thing and carbon dating, which is next. The reason why this discovery is so important is because we know helium diffuses rapidly. This means that all helium should have leaked out in less than 10 or 100,000 years. The question believers in uniformitarianism need to be asking themselves is, why are these rocks still full of helium atoms if the Earth is really billions of years old? An additional observation and discovery has been the detection of carbon in fossils, diamonds, coal, and fossilized wood. This carbon is found in locations in strata that those devoted to uniformitarianism and evolution would date back tens of millions of years old. Carbon-14 decays much too fast to be present in locations of tens of millions of years old. What does this mean? The most reasonable explanation is that the Earth is not as old as we have been told. Carbon-14 decays quickly enough that carbon-14 should be undetectable in far less than 1 million years. How do the advocates of evolution respond to this indisputable evidence? They will say that these samples are contaminated. This is the contamination rescue device. Remember, their basic assumption is that evolution is true, and the Earth and universe is old. They do not question this basic premise. The rescue device collapses for numerous reasons, but one of the most irrefutable reasons is due to the existence of carbon in diamonds. Defenders of uniformitarianism cannot use the contamination argument when it comes to diamonds because diamonds are the hardest substance on Earth. Its interior is incredibly resistant to contamination. This means any carbon-14 found in diamonds had to be there since the beginning. Diamonds require remarkably high pressure to form, and this pressure is found deep below the surface of the Earth. Carbon has been detected, and also requires a lot of time with that heat and pressure. Carbon has been detected in numerous samples of diamond, and the experts who hold to the old Earth paradigm cannot explain why. So let's pause really quickly. I know I have covered this in the carbon-14 video, but I'm going to briefly cover it here as well, just because it bears repeating, I guess, and if I don't repeat it, inevitably our friend here will just be like, hey, she didn't answer any of the questions, any of the things, she just directed us to other videos. It's like, it's not my fault you keep repeating the same dumb nonsense. It's not my responsibility to repeat it. However, I actually will go ahead and do it. So those carbon and diamonds relies almost entirely on this paper. I just pulled it up in the background, although you can't see it, which is by R.E. Taylor and J. Southern, titled The Use of Natural Diamonds to Monitor C14 in AMS Instrument Backgrounds. And this was published in the Nuclear Instruments and Methods in Physics Research journal. Creationists tend to interpret this paper in essentially this bizarro town way that is so far off from what the paper is actually saying that it really does border on dishonest, because I don't understand how you could actually make that leap. They argue that the paper is arguing that since carbon-14 is being found in these diamonds from the Paleozoic, young Earth, blah, 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 all that we just mentioned. But the scientists were intentionally trying to measure background radiation. That was the purpose of the study. It's even in the name, instrument backgrounds, the use of natural diamonds to monitor C14 AMS instrument backgrounds, right? So they're just taking the purpose of the paper and trying to warp it into being, well, we're finding like C14 literally in diamonds, which also wouldn't be impossible. Contamination really is a real thing. It can occur in many, many different ways, from water percolating down through cracks in the sediment and washing over, introducing carbon, again, to different kinds of minerals. It can be from various different kinds of like other radioactive materials that are nearby and veins nearby. But like, in addition, when some of the sample that they were using there was like carbon dated, they effectively vaporize a portion, right? And that vaporization allows them to get a radiocarbon ratio. So some of that vaporized carbon ends up contaminating subsequent samples ever so slightly. And that's kind of why they did this in the first place. They wanted to find out how likely contamination and background radiation was. Because keeping the background signal as low as possible and making sure the background signal is consistently quantified using blanks, you can calibrate, right? You have to have both of those things. You have to be able to calibrate. So they were using the diamonds intentionally to test background radiation, and thus they're picking up carbon. I actually wrote here, AIG took a routine study which was aiming to further calibrate radiocarbon dating and warped it into something entirely different, something the authors themselves are quite angry about, as they said in a subsequent comments, I believe it was. So diamonds, that's not going to be a deal here. But again, I covered that to death. I also covered the example that they used with the fossilized wood. It's a Snelling example. There was clear evidence of literal above ground water coming down and percolating over the sample, that Snelling, the young earth creationist who took the wood and was like, this wood is dating way younger than the basalt that it's found in, actually noted in his report itself, which is very funny. The dinosaur bones one, that's another classic, and you can actually reintroduce carbon into bone mineral in just an incredibly broad number of different ways. You can get recrystallization, permineralization, incrustation, bacterial contamination, uranium decay, and classic background radiation. All of this can reintroduce carbon. And the last thing was, I believe it was coal. That one is especially funny, but I know I said I wasn't going to go over all of this, but I had my notes right here, and so I figured I might as well. This one was amazing too. It's a classic example of background radiation because all of this coal that allegedly dated C14 was like right around the maximum date for C14, which, if you know anything about carbon-14 dating, is characteristic of contamination. Like, that's just setting up red flags. And what you do at that point is you say it's time to take more samples, it's time to do more tests. But the people who were collecting these coal samples were creationists, so they were quite happy with these dates. Of course, if you're using carbon dating, you're not going to get an ancient age because all of the carbon would be gone, right? So the prediction from the evolutionary side is that if you're picking up carbon, it's going to be very, very small levels of carbon, which shows up as the oldest maximum, right? That's how it works. So, oh boy. So I think we covered everything on that part. Defenders of uniformitarianism cannot use the contamination argument when it comes to diamonds because diamonds are the hardest substance on Earth. I already discussed that the diamonds that they're finding carbon-14 in, they use a single paper to justify it. And it was intentionally measuring background radiation, so that doesn't work. But diamonds can, contrary to what's being said here, they can be contaminated in other ways as well. It's just that's not even what we're talking about. So it's like you're wrong, but even if we let you be right here, you're still wrong. Carbon has been detected in numerous samples of diamond, and the experts who hold to the old Earth paradigm cannot explain why. With all this overwhelming evidence for accelerated decay in a young Earth, it should be quite obvious that if radioisotope decay was accelerated at the time of the Great Flood of Noah, as the evidence appears to suggest, then radiometric decay clocks could never truly be depended on when they provide dates of millions of years old. Let us now summarize everything. It should now be clear that the perfect test to see how accurate and trustworthy these dating methods would really be is to test rocks of known age and see what the results are. Let us look at the potassium argon method. Proceeds to use the wrong tool to measure these brand new volcanic rocks, which you can't even do anyways. Specialists in radioisotope dating assume zero argon for the decay process to begin. What do we know? Well, argon is present in rocks of known age. Why should we assume zero argon in rocks of unknown age? That's also just that's also just wrong, right? If you're using the wrong tool, you're picking up noise. You're not actually finding argon in that sample. And they would know this if they put even a cursory Google search. Cursory Google search is like my catchphrase for this text. Cursory Google search, that's all it would have taken to eliminate the majority of the errors. But then you would, if you eliminated the errors using Google searches, you would have one page. It would be the table of contents, which would say nothing. And there maybe be an acknowledgement section. Why in the world would biblical creationists trust dating methods if numerous of them cannot even give accurate dates for rocks of known age? As I indicated earlier, the rate scientists themselves discovered these inconsistencies are much more common than we would think. The rate scientists admitted they needed a miracle too, which is funny. Rocks of known age come back with major discrepancies, therefore he's just repeating himself over and over again. Plain and simple, he says. When challengers of the biblical creation do concede the evidence found in the rocks does strongly indicate a radioisotope decay has been accelerated at some point in the past, they will typically address the evidence with a quite common objection. They will say that the amount of heat produced by the global flood of Noah and the accelerated nuclear decay correlated with it would have boiled the oceans. They also say the ensuing radiation would have been devastating for Noah and the animals aboard the ark. Firstly, we know for a fact that accelerated nuclear decay has occurred based on radio halos, fission tracks, and helium in zircon crystals. Again, none of that works. I actually forgot he mentioned the heat problem in this, so my mistake from earlier. As iterated earlier, abundance of helium present in zircons is an indisputable testimony of a young Earth. Very quickly on this, without getting too in-depth into it, then it should be ubiquitous. We shouldn't be finding any zircons without helium. This is the same stuff you get with the soft tissue in dinosaur bones. They're like, look, we're finding soft tissue in these dinosaur bones. We should be pulling nothing but gobs of tissue if they're 6,000 years old. Because we find ice age, so Pleistocene mammals, that are just, they still have blood in them, right? A foal was discovered, I believe it was like around last year, a foal of an ice age horse was discovered. Blood's still in it, right? And it was like 30,000 years old. So it's like, we should be finding these things everywhere. The fact that they're not ubiquitous is very problematic. Such small atoms should have diffused out of the crystals long ago. This all means that accelerated nuclear decay has occurred in the past. This cannot be fought against. Catastrophic plate tectonics, runaway subduction, and subduction friction can easily wreak enough havoc to accelerate nuclear decay in the rocks. So you're adding heat. Heat and pressure and substantial volcanic activity would aid in the speeding up decay rate at the time of the flood. That's not how that works, first of all. Second of all, again, more heat. All of these things considered, this implies there must be an answer to the so-called heat problem associated with the Genesis flood. A few reasonable and realistic solutions can be provided to solve this problem. The enormous amount of water that was on the earth at the time would shield Noah and the animals on the ark. Not even close, because you are vaporizing the crust. Like, water is going to steam in that much time with the amount of heat that we're talking about. 5,000 trillion 1 megaton H-bombs under hydroplate, which these guys subscribe to. This should be incredibly apparent given the nature of the global flood. For example, if you have a mile or more of water, we use water in a nuclear reactor to protect and shield things. This would not only shield Noah and the animals from radiation, it would take up much of the heat. Dr. Andrew Snelling and Dr. Walt Brown, hydroplate, pointed out that there exists a lot of evidence suggesting the breakup and formation of the fountains of the Great Deep. Supersonic jet streams would have taken up most of the heat into space. That does not work at all, by the way, because if you're carrying it up to space, it can't fall back down. So your cooling if it can reach the cooling mechanism, it won't fall back down as rain. Also, there is heat exchange occurring the entire way up. And in order to get these jets to supersonic speeds, which I don't think they could reach anyways if the physics serves from Glenn Williamson, physicist who I consulted for the hydroplate video. I don't even think they can actually reach supersonic speeds. But even if they could, the type of nozzle that you need is a Dalavel nozzle, which it looks kind of like this, right? There's like a little substructure underneath the opening. So you need every fountain of the Great Deep to be a Dalavel nozzle, which don't occur naturally. Humans make them, like out of steel. And on top of that, even if you have your nozzles to attempt to try to jet these things up, there's heat exchange going on the entire way up. You're still vaporizing the granitic crust, at the very least. Also, it's funny that he mentioned Snelling and Walt Brown because those two disagree. Snelling is CPT, Walt Brown is hydroplate. As you can see, there are a number of aspects at play during the global flood that would resolve this objection to accelerated radioisotope decay. I just wrote nope. So that concludes this section, this short section on radiometric decay, again, the incompetence level is off the scales. But it's fun to go over. It doesn't matter. No one knows or cares about these texts. I know that's harsh, but it is the truth. They have something like 12 books published, I think, and on a community post a while ago, they were talking about how we have hundreds of sales of 12 books. Hundreds of sales of 12 books? That's not great. It's really not. But I digress. I mean, they will reach some people, but, if those people are going to fall for this, then they were never really interested in the science in the first place. It's all about reaching a conclusion that was established at the beginning. So the goal of science is to be consistently mutable. The idea is that science can change as new evidence comes to light. That is the exact opposite of the goal of a text like this. There is absolutely nothing that could change any of these people's minds, and that's okay. They're allowed to believe what they want to believe. The problem is that kind of attitude bleeds over into other pseudosciences. So, but rest assured, creationism is falling. It's falling faster than it's ever fallen before, and there are fewer young Earth creationists in the United States than there have ever been, which is a good thing, I think. It is a good thing. So, with that one out of the way, the next episode we're going to be covering Raumat's cladistics, which I guess I'll give you a little preview just because it's absolutely incredible. Let me find it here. Hold on. You're gonna be so happy when you hear about what he's done. He does the raccoon or the skunk human comparison that he did a long time ago. But this is what I outlined. This is just, I've got underlining, and underlining, just because it's incredible. He goes, can apes play music? That's one of the arguments that he's giving here. We'll be talking a lot about it, though, at another juncture. I'm trying to find the one I'm looking for, but I think you guys might just have to wait and see. Humans aren't monkeys. We aren't apes either. So, dang it, I found it right at the end. Would you want your daughter to go out with an ape? Now, be honest, you were probably grossed out by that, weren't you? What is Raumat spending his free time Googling is my question. Anyways, my gentle and, of course, very modern apes, thank you again for being here. These are always very fun. As usual, the next text that we're going to be covering is Contested Bones by Sanford and Roop. It's definitely more high effort than Why Human Evolution is False. But that's because Sanford and Roop both have some formal training, even though none of it is even adjacent to paleoanthropology, which is why they wrote a book on it. But it also makes more in-depthly incorrect arguments, which is going to be fun. I actually got an email from a young Earth creationist who was very excited about me going over Contested Bones. I am sorry if this offends that person, but I'm pretty sure it's just standing for truth. I'm pretty sure that he sent me the email because he doesn't want me to cover any more of his own texts. Or it could have been one of his sock accounts. I don't know. I don't really care, honestly. I'm going to cover it anyways. And then maybe after that, we'll cover another standing for truth text. I hear he's got a human evolution handbook coming out. I can't even imagine how much fun that's going to be to read. So take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.